So we are now looking at Europe from 1815 to 1830. We've just finished the Industrial Revolution. We've talked about how the Industrial Revolution really creates this concept of progress, urbanization, mechanization. We've talked about alternative powers. And now we're going to see kind of how that impacted the political elements of Europe. Especially this part is 1815 to 1830. We're going to be looking at the Congress of Vienna that brings an end to the wars of Napoleon. And then we're going to talk about this conservative reactionary era that even England kind of participates in, which is kind of an oddity. But let's go and jump in. All right. So as a historian, did the 19th century begin in 1815? This is in contrast, maybe 1780. If I identify 1780, I'm thinking about the first industrial revolution that really started. But I've always looked at 1815 because I believe that is much more of a threshold. In 1815, the end of the French Revolution era, the end of the Enlightenment, the end of neoclassical art, and really this kind of concept in which the failings of the French Revolution. And in 1815, we have a distinct moment of change. So please memorize 1815 with the Congress of Vienna. A couple slides, we'll talk much more about the Congress of Vienna, but 1815, the Congress of Vienna really is a watershed of it's like early modern era, and then we have this late modern era now that we're really going to be looking at. The 18th century diplomatic rivalries were solved. Remember that. So we're done with the Anglo-French rivalry. We're done with some of those other elements. We're done. So everything's kind of at peace. And that first industrial revolution is really amping up. 1815 really is a moment in time in which we're moving towards capital-intensive production. So 1815 is a nice, cute beginning, bookend, if you will, of this as we usher in the era. And in doing so, we're going to see conservatism. Conservatism is really going to make a rebound, if you will, in this time period. And there's only two different varieties of conservatism I really want to be able to identify. First, we already know about Burke and English conservatism. Reflections on the Revolution of France, we talked a little bit about that. We talked about how he argued the government was a social contract between the present, past generation, and posterity, that every decision has to be thought about our forefathers and our future. And in doing so, this is when he rejected the rapid, absolute, radical change of the French Revolution. He supported this evolutionary change. And that's going to be that idea. And I want to point out from 1790s into around 1830, this British conservatism is actually going to be kind of put to the side, and that we're going to see it's more reactionary. We'll definitely get in there a little bit later. But I just want to point out, when I think of 19th century conservatism in England, I think of Edmund Burke. I think about this idea of evolutionary change, building upon the concept of the social contract. And so we see that relationship with Locke. Where Joseph de Maistre is quite the opposite. He reflects continental conservatism. He is the older gentleman to the right here in the painting. I do like that image. But he really talked about three pillars of stability. He's reflecting on the chaos of the Revolutionary era and the wars of Napoleon. So what he believes first pillar, absolutism. We need a legitimate absolute monarch to bring stability. This is the opposite of constitutional government, republicanism, constitutional monarchy. He's saying, no, any of those kind of changes create chaos. So we're going to go back in time. Almost, he's dreaming of that pre-1789 France again. The aristocracy. He believed that the aristocracy blood was special. They were privileged. God chose them to oversee the society. So if you remove the aristocracy, you create chaos. And lastly, he believed in the national church. I don't know if he's necessarily Catholic per se, but when he looked at it, he believed there needs to be one national church. This kind of goes back to Jean Baudin, if you remember that. The idea that if you have more than one religion, you have chaos. So now all of a sudden, it doesn't matter if it's Protestant or Catholic, the king is going to create the national church. So I hope you see that where Burke is kind of looking to the forward, still connected to the past, but moving forward. Maistre is in reverse. He wants to, that's not what makes him so reactionary. And from this, we're now going to see the conservative giant, Clemens von Metternich. He is the conservative of the early 19th century. We actually call it the Age of Metternich from 1815 to 1848. He's the Austrian foreign minister who would dominate this age. He accepted the most reactionary form of conservatism as he rejected all aspects of enlightened liberalism and nationalism. He blamed the liberal-minded middle class for the chaotic revolutionary era. And he really called for the restoration of the legitimate dynasties. But before we move on with this slide, I do want to point out, before we move on with this slide, I want to pause here and just explain why he's so against liberalism and nationalism. First of all, as an Austrian foreign minister, he is opposed to liberalism because he believes the absolute monarch must have arbitrary power. That whoever the Habsburg dynasty monarch is, he has the authority to maintain stability. So he's going to reject constitutional restraints. And I think it's pretty obvious if we remember Austria. Why would an Austrian oppose nationalism? Well, it's because there's 10, 15, 20 different national groups within the Austrian Empire. You have Italians, Hungarians, Romanians, Slovenians, Croatians or Croats, Bosnians, Czechs, Germans. So what happens if there's a wave of nationalism? That would break it apart. So this is why Clemens von Metternich, he absolutely is this giant conservative. I'm going to pause here